Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Daniel Gallen, and we are fresh out of Beaver Stadium on a Saturday night, and Penn State is 3-0. And folks, if you wanted domination on Saturday in Beaver Stadium, you got it. 56-0 victory for the number 10 Nittany Lions over what is really right now a hapless Kent State squad that has now lost 13 consecutive games going back to last September. But they'll move forward. They'll deal with their issues. But Penn State comes out of this one with a lot of positives to focus on, specifically the ability to go and run away from a team like this and get Drew Aller and a lot of key starters off the field, early, mid-third quarter. Not only do you get some rest there before Big Ten play, but you get a lot of action. I mean, we'll go through it in greater detail on our Monday episode. By the time then, we'll have a chance to go through snap counts. But there were a ton of debuts. There were a lot of firsts for this roster up and down. But, Daniel, at the end of the day, you got to come back to that word dominance. Set a program record for total yards, 718 of them. Set a program record for first downs in a game with 40 of those. And since 1947, only 7 times have they held an opponent to fewer yards than they did today. 68 total yards for Kent State in this matchup. So, again, 3-0. Each of these wins have looked quite different. And this was basically exactly the script that you would have hoped to draw up if you're James Franklin. Minus one thing, which we'll get to later.
Yeah, I think that coming into the game, what Tennessee did to Kent State last week set a really high bar in terms of, I think, fan expectations. So when you're seeing 7-0 late in the first quarter, still a 2-score game into the second quarter, I think that might have raised some eyebrows or caused a little bit of angst out there. But when you look at the end result, the total domination that Penn State had across both halves, to go, I think, 28-0 in the first half, 28-0 in the second half, I think that shows the balance that James Franklin has been talking about. I think that you saw Penn State really control this game, sustain some of those drives, and we saw what James Franklin had been talking about. More plays equals more touches, which we'll get to. And I think the end result, and that also trickled down to the second team later in the game, those guys getting out there and continuing to move the ball. I think you just saw a really, really complete, dominant performance on both sides of the ball. And when all is said and done, that's what you want. That's what you needed to see out of today. I know the fireworks weren't there from the jump. I know that Penn State didn't necessarily jump out all over them, but I think to see how they sustained and went wire to wire, I think that that's something that you need to feel really good about. And ultimately Penn State did what it needed to do, how it needed to do it against a team like Kent State.
Penn State ran 81 plays on Saturday in this matchup. They averaged about 9 yards per play on their way to 718. Kent State, on the other hand, they had 43 total plays on Saturday. They averaged about 1.6 yard per play. They ended up losing their first 2 quarterbacks. Their starter was out of the game within the first series after a hit from Dennis Sutton. And really the defense was relentless the rest of the way. There were some mechanisms that moved around for this defense, from the coaching staff to the players on the field. And we'll get to some of those details in a little while. But Daniel, let's just kind of lay out how it went, because you mentioned there was a moment there where I felt like Beaver Stadium, not the whole crowd, but there was a portion of the crowd maybe on the brink of letting out some boos. It was 7-0. I think Penn State had 3 possessions at that point. One of them was a punt, the first of which ends up you have a turnover. And James Franklin seemed to say that Kent State just played that play perfectly. He didn't really put the blame on Bo Perbula, but Bo Perbula was into the situation at quarterback. They're near the red zone at that point on their first possession of the game. Drew Aller's lined up in the slot. Perbula looks for Tyler Warren. It gets picked off. And then, it's just 7-0. There's about 6 minutes to go in the half. And I think the one thing is Penn State fans weren't worried they were going to lose the game. But like we were talking in the press box, people who aren't watching a lick of this game are, keeping their eyes on the scoreboard, and they're seeing, let's see. Well, Bowling Green was up at halftime, and now it's 7-0, and they're about halfway through the second quarter. What's going on there? Well, they laid down the gauntlet on Kent State, and it was really impressive to see, Daniel. They basically did flip that switch. Penn State scored 28 points in about 7.5 minutes of game clock after they were up 7-0 with 6 minutes left in the half. That result was 35-0 early in the third quarter, and Drew Aller spending the rest of the day on the sideline. Penn State ultimately scored touchdowns on 5 straight possessions, On 7 of their last 8 drives, they reached the end zone. Talked about the program records. That 56-point margin, by the way, Daniel, you did some of the digging on this afterwards. You have a story up at Lions 24/7. The 5th largest margin of victory, or tied for the 5th in Franklin's 11 season time here at Penn State. And they're now 4-0 against the betting spread. When you talk about being a 40-point favorite, this was the all-time high in the Franklin era, 49 points. They win by 56. Little help late from Bo Prabula. I think we've heard that before in the betting realm. But Daniel, again, from really once they got cooking on offense, they never simmered.
Yeah, I will come clean that I texted someone who covers college football nationally early in the second quarter, and I said, some stuff happens, this might be worth monitoring. We might have a situation here at Beaver Stadium, and he replied and said, no shot. And that's how it ended up being. But I do think that I felt early on, you could feel that Penn State was trying to sustain drives. It was trying to be efficient. I think that coming into this game, I know I picked Penn State to score 66 points, but I knew it wasn't going to be like Tennessee did it last week. That's just too different. It's just a different offense, a different team, just a different kind of style of play going on there. And I think that that's where, when you play that style of game, you can't afford to lose possessions like you did with an interception, and like they did in that second drive or that third drive. I think that that's kind of the caution when you are trying to focus on sustaining things and moving things along. If you shorten a game, it shortens the game for the other team, but it does it for you too. So I think Franklin and Penn State trying to find that balance between the quick strikes and these longer drives where they're controlling the game, spreading the ball around, I think is going to be really interesting to watch as the season goes on. But I just think that coming away from it, you just saw such a balanced effort. So many different guys involved, so many freshmen. They did what we thought that they should do in terms of getting guys involved, a little bit of taste of action. I just came away really impressed. I mean, 56 points. It's one of those things where when you think about the game, it doesn't really feel like that many points, just because it's like 56-0. It's a blowout. That's what it should be. And then you put it in the context of the biggest blowouts during Franklin's tenure, and it's kind of like, whoa, like this is a rare thing. This is a pretty big deal. So I just came away, like the completeness of everything just really stood out to me.
I think the skeptics out there probably will say, well, who did they play? You guys are saying you're impressed and all this. Well, who did they play? They played who was in front of them for 60 minutes in Beaver Stadium on Saturday. They didn't really do that against Bowling Green. They played, but they didn't play up to their standard. And it was really from start to finish. With a couple moments there early on where you just were waiting for them to really find their momentum. And James Franklin said they didn't maybe start as he wanted them to, but final score is 56-0. And Drew Aller's not sniffing the field in the fourth quarter. And that's a beautiful thing.
Barely in the third quarter, too.
Yeah, barely in the third quarter. And he was out of there. Tyler Warren, I mean, I'm ready to say he's a bona fide star. I didn't know if I would be there this fast in the season, but I am certainly there. And I felt like we were trending in that direction last week. He went for a Penn State program record after that Bowling Green game, 146 yards, I think it was, on 8 catches. The week before, he caught a touchdown against West Virginia. The way he finished last year with a bunch of yards, 120 plus in the Peach Bowl. Look, today was different because of the utilization, and you can see that Andy Kotelnicki has a new favorite toy, because Andy Kotelnicki's calling card has been maximizing his personnel, playing to their strengths. And Tyler Warren is the last guy to talk about himself, but everybody around that program, and most notably James Franklin, will tell you everything about Tyler Warren. He came out in the press conference today. He said he is the best tight end in the conference. He's the best tight end in college football. I didn't mean to shortchange you there, Tyler Warren. Best tight end in college football. And Daniel, you and I both heard multiple times from James in recent weeks, the most complete tight end in college football. And you said after the game, that was a different tone, or that was the similar tone, but a different word. And it felt like there was more gravity to it. And he went on to state the case of how Tyler Warren can do all this stuff. And we did see him do all this stuff. He caught a touchdown to open the scoring for Penn State, a 14-yard catch from Drew Aller. And then we also saw him throw a touchdown to Nick Singleton. And in between those two things, along the way, he was actually rushing for a first down on a big gain, a gain of 16 yards. And when he was lined up in the wild Wildcat. Next time he throws the ball and Nick Singleton's open for a touchdown. And so he was the tone setter. If he finished the afternoon with 5 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown, again, he was out of the game. Yank him as soon as you can. We talked about that in the pregame podcast. But Daniel, he's becoming one of those players that you just feel like you can lean on, and you can do it in a variety of ways. And you just wonder how the opponent, especially a big chunk of this Big Ten schedule for them, how are those defenses going to really come up with a consistent answer for a 6'6", 260-pound tight end that now has a catch of at least 14 yards or longer in 9 straight games?
Yeah, Franklin did up the ante on his comments post game, going from that most complete tight end to best tight end in the country. I think we're still trying to figure out who said what award did what to really kick this off. I know we talked about that, I think, before the game, but Tyler Warren is just such a complete player. He can do so many different things for you. And I think that every once in a while when a coach praises his player, you kind of go, well, I don't know about that. But with what Franklin says about Warren, I think it all passes the eye test with what we've seen. And I think that Andy Kotelnicki lining him up in the shotgun, that's a really, really fun wrinkle. I know that we saw that a couple years ago when Warren, I think, was a redshirt freshman. But this was a little bit different. I mean, to put him back there and just let him go, run up the gut, I mean, that's something that you put on tape. That's something to think about. How do you stop that, et cetera, et cetera. And then the pass to Nick Singleton. We have a great photo from Grace Brennan on Lines 24/7, and it just looks like the most casual pass by Warren, just getting it out so quick, but put it where it needed to be, and it got Nick Singleton into space. And yeah, I think that when we talk about the creativity from Andy Kotelnicki, we've talked so much about Bo Pribula, Drew Aller, horizontal motion for these guys. And we knew that Tyler Warren could be a fun piece in it. But, I mean, I wasn't expecting him to take a couple shotgun snaps when I got to Beaver Stadium today. I thought that was a really neat wrinkle, something else to think about. I mean, you think about Penn State in the red zone and near the goal line now, all the different things that they can do, all the different players that they have. It gets really, really interesting really quickly right there. But just a really kind of like cool game from Warren today. I know that against Bowling Green 2 weeks ago, that was the fireworks where all those catches went for first downs, or most of them did, just a really cool performance through the air. But today was just a lot of different things. And like you said, get him out of there early, keep him healthy. We know he's such a big piece of this offense, and he has really shown that through a couple weeks. So we'll see. I mean, I think I ran the numbers at one point, and I think he's averaging 12 yards a catch, maybe, or 14 yards a catch. He's just picking up chunks of yardage, and it's really, really helping this offense along.
Can we talk about what he did before he caught that touchdown? Really, he set up his own touchdown. He would throw a touchdown to Nick Singleton, but he essentially carried Nick Singleton to a first down.
Totally forgot about that.
Drive. It was easy to forget because we didn't even mention this. Tyler Warren made one of the best one-handed grabs I've seen in Beaver Stadium, and this is how versatile his day was. We're forgetting some of these standout moments that really just drew oohs and ahs from the press box, and I'm sure the people sitting in their living rooms and people sitting in the stands of Beaver Stadium. That one-handed grab, he kind of stabbed it in the air. It didn't look all that natural. And you mentioned he's a lefty. He goes forward with his right hand, add a degree of difficulty to that. But there was such a great moment where Nick Singleton, he kind of stalled. He was running up against a cluster of linemen there. It was a 3rd and short situation, maybe 2nd and short, but Warren essentially scoops him up, and he picked up like 3 or 4 yards. He just kind of flung him like a giant. And Warren's about as soft-spoken of a dude when you go one-on-one with him, and we did that this past week. And we did it as a media group, and he just, the way he plays, he's a giant out there right now, and it's been really fun to watch his progress. And we'll get over to Nick Singleton. I just wanted to mention he keeps doing his thing. He's 103 total yards on 13 touches. It's 11 carries. It's 2 catches. He's been a weapon out of the backfield in a variety of ways this season, more than he was, I think, early on in his career. And obviously the explosive plays have been there in the way they weren't. He didn't go for 40 today, but he did have an 18-yard run, and he did have a 26-yard, or he had a 17-yard catch, I should say, which got him in the end zone. And so you like what you're getting there. It was a really kind of a spread out kind of day for the running back group. Katron Allen had 66 yards on 11 carries. Nick Singleton had 81 yards on 11 carries. Perbula gets involved, 45 yards. We'll talk about what happened with some of the younger running backs a little bit later. But they ended up with 309 rushing yards, but no one was taxed, Daniel. Ultimately, you do have an injury involved. But again, kind of a late moment for Singleton and Allen. And I think Nick Singleton's averaging about 9 to 10 yards per offensive touch through 3 games. That's more like what we saw freshman year. People would consider peak Nick Singleton. Right now, it feels like a new peak Nick Singleton. Let's talk about what else we saw from this offense, and that was the distribution of wealth in the pass attack. We talked about coming into this matchup, Daniel. Julian Fleming, bunch of run the first couple games, about 70 offensive snaps. He had 1 catch for 3 yards. Liam Clifford, I should say, Sean's younger brother. He had 60 offensive snaps the first couple games, and no targets, no catches. Today, 3 catches, 64 yards for Liam Clifford, his first career touchdown. Julian Fleming has a big pickup. He has a couple catches, gets about 50 yards on the day, 60 yards, on the day. And all of a sudden, those guys are in postgame. They're smiling. Omari Evans goes over 100 yards. And this is kind of the plan coming together. All of a sudden, what was our conversation coming out of week 1, Daniel? It can't just be Harrison Wallace and just random catches here and there. Well, Harrison Wallace got the party started today. He had some early grabs, chain movers, but Omari Evans went over 100 yards. He had another long touchdown. That's what he's just doing this now on a regular basis. Julian Fleming came up with a flashy play. He told me he got stuck between 3rd and 4th gear. He felt like he should have scored a touchdown on that one play, but it was a big gain for him. And I thought Liam Clifford looked fantastic when he got the ball in space. And we got to talk about the trigger man. Drew Aller was putting the ball where it needed to be all day, and he was finding the right targets.
Yeah, I think that going back to how they spread this ball around, Drew Aller finishes 17 for 21 for 309 and 3 touchdowns, but he only threw 1 pass in the second half. That was the 59-yard touchdown to Omari Evans. In the first half, he threw the ball 20 times. He threw the ball 20 times all game against Bowling Green. He threw the ball 17 times all game against West Virginia. I know that coming out of it, it was the first 2 games, people were like, where's Fleming? Where's Clifford? Where's this guy? Where's that guy? And it's like, well, you've got Tyler Warren, you got Harrison Wallace, you only have 1 ball to go around and you only have so many opportunities. But I think today they did a really good job of spreading it around. You combine Aller, Perbula, Warren, 24-31 for 409 and 5 touchdowns. And you look through Warren, 5 catches, Evans, 4 catches, Clifford, 3 catches, Wallace, 3 catches, and then Fleming, Luke Reynolds, Nick Singleton, each with 2. I mean, I think that's more of what we were expecting to see. And it's game flow dependent, obviously. Like if Harrison Wallace is doing what he's doing, if Tyler Warren is doing what he's doing those first 2 weeks, that's what you stick with. But I think coming out of it, to see Julian Fleming make a play like that, to see Liam Clifford make a play like that, to see Harrison Wallace, after being quiet against Bowling Green, get those 2 catches early in the game I think they were both on 3rd down to move the chains. Then he had a big catch on the sideline to keep the ball moving late in the first half. I just think that that's what we were envisioning. It's good to see guys put that on tape, not only for opponents down the road, but I think for the fan base, for people watching, to go in with even more confidence that there are different guys in this offense that can get it done. And I think that's a huge takeaway from today.
There are bigger stages ahead, and that will start next Saturday. Primetime matchup, NBC, 7:30 kickoff. That was just announced as we were kind of settling in for this podcast. It's going to be Illinois coming to town at 4-0. They were ranked number 24 going into this week. Then they went on the road and beat number 22 Nebraska. So they're going to move up the rankings. We'll see where Penn State's at, but this is a nice Big Ten showdown under the bright lights of Beaver Stadium. So again, bigger test to wait. But with Drew Aller so far, Daniel, I'd say he's 3 for 3 and looking the part and kind of matching up with so much of those descriptions that we heard during the season, during the offseason in terms of his demeanor, the athleticism. It shows up every week, and not just him running for a first down or running for a touchdown, which he did today, but the way he's able to extend plays and give those pass targets downfield opportunities to gain some separation, and then he's keeping his eyes downfield. And because of that athleticism and improved mobility, he's got an opportunity to extend, an extra second, an extra 2 or 3 seconds, perhaps. Defenders are going to have more speed now. They're not going to take on MAC defenders anymore. But I really like what we've seen from Drew Aller. And you look at the statistics. He's got that one interception, and he got it out of the way earlier this year. But right now, he's up to 10 total touchdowns on the season. And as a rusher and a passer combined, he's right around 70% completion rating. And again, I just think you're getting the early returns that everyone was hoping that you'd get from Drew Aller. And you matched it up with what we're hearing about his leadership development and his ability to kind of steer the ship a bit more than he could as a sophomore. This is trending in a good direction.
Yeah, I think that this is the Aller that we were expecting to see. I know Illinois has some good defensive backs, and I'm excited to see what they can do. We talked about it last week, and it was a talking point, with Drew Aller and with James Franklin, the depth of target that Penn State has had this year through the air. I know that I'm really interested to see what PFF has for that tomorrow. When
that number's going up. No doubt about that.
And so I'm interested to see, what that looks like in the whole season. But the one number that stands out to me, I'm searching for it right now. I did not put it into the story, but Drew Aller's yards per attempt is just way up. It's over 12.5 at this point. It was down at 8 last year. I think that just shows the success and the efficiency that Penn State has had through the air this year. And you pair that with 71% completion percentage through 3 games. I think that's a real indicator of the success, because it's what we talked about. James Franklin really liked to point at the 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions last year, but you dug a little bit deeper. The completion percentage, I think, was down under 60%. That yards per attempt number was around 8. That ADOT was around 8. It was just not pretty of a picture when you got under the hood, not to mention the eye test in the big games, which we don't need to revisit. But now that you have these other numbers, you can say what you want about Bowling Green, West Virginia, Kent State, but it's the fact that you're able to do it against those opponents. Like, that's when you have to be able to do it. It's like what we talked about, not wanting to see another Villanova game from 2021. It's like, you need to see him do it against opponents like this. Illinois is going to be tough. I like that defense. Like I said, like those defensive backs, but I think what Aller has done, what Penn State has shown, what these wide receivers have done, what Tyler Warren can do, the pass game is just in such a nice place moving forward.
3 different Penn State players threw touchdowns. You had Bo Prabula finding Khalil Dinkins back in action and really making an impact. We saw him involved a lot more today. And then, of course, Tyler Warren, Drew Aller throwing touchdowns. Just a few other takeaways, and we'll dive into the offensive explosion and everything they accomplished more on Monday episode after we come out of James Franklin's weekly press conference. But Cam Wallace suffered an injury.
12.6 yards per attempt.
What's that?
12.6 yards per attempt.
There it is, 12.6. And last year was 8.
Yes.
I mean, that's just massive jump. But Cam Wallace, unfortunately, among a really day of positives, this was a negative. Looked to be painful, and we'll see the significance of it in terms of how long he may be sidelined. But he wasn't able to really walk off under his own power at all. He had a group of defensive linemen. His teammates came out, kind of picked him up and brought him to the sidelines, which was really cool to see. At the same time, it was really unfortunate to see because this is a redshirt freshman getting some extended action. He had his first career touchdown on the afternoon, 39 yards on 9 carries for the day. And he's somebody we've heard really good things about at running back 3. And his departure from this game, Daniel, meant that Quentin Martin Jr. had a chance to step on up. And I thought he showed some things. I mean, he was going up against, probably down to its last drops of gas defense because it's given up about 130 points the last couple of weeks. But late in that game, Quentin Martin showed some juice, I thought. He showed some agility as well. Ends up with 24 yards on 7 carries. Almost had himself a touchdown. What didn't quite get there. Pope Bubula gets to punch it in. But again, it might be Quentin Martin, at least in the short term. We know James Franklin likes to phrase things long term, short term with injuries. just at least for the short term, Quentin Martin may all of a sudden have a bit of a role here as the next man up at running back behind Nick Singleton and Katron Allen.
Yeah, we talked about it during the week that Quentin Martin was in his number 25. He was not in a scout team jersey, which I think signaled him as that RB4. It would have been interesting that if Cam Moss finished the game out healthy, if we would have seen Quentin Martin or not. That's always something to take into account. But to see him out there, I think a lot of people have been excited to see him in real game action. I know I was. I was mostly writing at that time and looking up some different numbers. So I'll have to go back and really watch Quentin Martin's snaps on Sunday or Monday. But I came away, impressed with the big gains. I think you saw a little bit of the East-West thing that a lot of guys struggle with, whether that's high school to college to the NFL. But I think that if he can get downhill, he can make some guys miss and make some things happen.
We got to shout out a couple other freshmen who got involved there on the offensive side of things. Egan Boyer got some work at right tackle. We've pretty much only seen him work on the left side when we get our looks at practice, but he's come a long way as a freshman offensive lineman, putting on about 40, 50 pounds since January enrollment. Hearing really good things about his mindset. Cooper Cousins was involved a bunch today on the interior. And then we did see Tysier Denmark come up with his first career catch. There was a lot of firsts, as I said. But Luke Reynolds, man, Luke Reynolds grab, that might be a sign of things to come. There's been comparisons to Mike Gesicki in terms of being able to go up and get it in contested moments, and that was exactly what you saw. I think he's more of a physical presence than Mike Gesicki was, especially that early in his career. I don't think there's a lot of debate about that. But, man, he doesn't have to be tight end 1 right now because we already talked about who tight end 1 is, and Khalil Dinkins is back, so he doesn't really need to be tight end 2. Today was more like tight end 3. He got a lot of work late. And if he's tight end 3 and Khalil Dinkins can be available for you, Andy Kotelnicki's got to be licking his chops about how he can incorporate that position over the course of these next 9 regular season matchups.
Yeah, if you didn't have the chance to see Luke Reynolds' catch, you'll probably see it in the highlight reel for the game. I embedded it in my story on Lions 24/7, but just really going up and getting it, coming down with it. Penn State hurried it up to make it so the play couldn't be reviewed or challenged just to be safe. But I think that's what we've heard about with Luke Reynolds is that he has that wide receiver athleticism. That's what he came in with. He had to put on the weight to really be able to mix it up on the line of scrimmage. He's done that. That's why he's playing. That's why he has the green light. That's more so why he has the green light than what he did on that catch. But I think that's just really, really tantalizing. And his development over the course of this year, he seems to be firmly in that tight end 3 spot behind Warren and Dinkins. And we know that depending on the package, you can put him and Warren out there too in certain spots. And I think that he's going to get some looks. And I think that's a sign of things to come both this year and beyond for Luke Reynolds.
Per usual, we're guilty of really spotlighting the offense to a much larger degree coming out of these matchups. And sometimes that's because of frustrations. This time, well, when you set a record for first downs and for total yards, we got to give a little bit of attention there. So we're going to finish off here the next 5 to 10 minutes to close out the show on the defense, though, because there are some moving parts there. And generally speaking, again, dominance will apply to that side of the ball as well. 68 yards allowed, tied for eighth since 1947 for the Penn State defense. There's been a lot of good ones. And let's start with the leadership here. Tom Allen, who we saw on the sideline the first couple of weeks, Armrock Brennan brought this up in the postgame press conference because we didn't see Tom Allen on the sideline today. He said, well, was he up in the booth? And what was the what led to that decision? You have a story up at Lions247.com about it. I know it's Kent State. I know. But the immediate return from this was damn good.
Yeah, James Franklin said that he approached Tom Allen with the idea. I think Franklin said before the Bowling Green game, maybe. I'd have to look that up again. But anyway, this idea was floated earlier this month, whether that was last week or before that. I'm blanking right now. But this week they decided to do it. Tom Allen moved up to the booth. And Franklin has said this before. I think he said it last year when Mike Yurcich moved up. And I think he said it in the past when it comes to calling plays, is that he said that calling a game from the booth for him, in his opinion, is the best place to do it because you can see everything. You're in a controlled environment. you're still able to communicate down to the sideline. I talked to Jalen Reed after the game, and he said that it just felt the same as it did the first two games, and with Allen up on the booth. Anthony Poindexter, the co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach, he's usually in the booth. He was on the field this time, so that's the switch to keep the numbers the same. But the early returns were pretty good. Franklin said that he doesn't know if Allen is going to do that for the Illinois game next week, but I think so far you can't really argue with the result with Kent State. Something else that Franklin said is that Tom Allen has been used to being a head coach, and you have a lot of different responsibilities as the head coach, and you have to be on the sideline. You have to be involved with everything. Defensive coordinator, that's not necessarily the case. I think that you're focused on that defense, and you can delegate things a little bit more in terms of managing emotions, managing tone, that sort of thing. So it was an interesting, thorough answer from Franklin. Who knows when we'll get the chance to talk to Tom Allen about this, but I thought it was pretty interesting, and an interesting wrinkle for a game that's 56-0 for us.
I did double check. Franklin said he brought the idea, this idea up last week. So it was during the bye week. It was something that they hadn't apparently discussed preseason, but it brought up coming off the bye week. And I'll tell you what, I didn't pick a shutout. I went 63-7, so I had the margin right. But I said on the pregame podcast, I was like, there's too many different, guys in different roles, and there's going to be a lot of young players late. I just don't trust them to get it done and get the shutout quite there to predict it. They didn't have a busted play, really. I mean, to do that with as many freshmen and different pieces. Again, I know Kent State's down to their third quarterback. They're a beat-up football team right now at this stage. But to not have one busted play where someone goes deep on you, or you get a chance to have a red zone defensive moment, I thought really impressive. And early on, Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton set the tone. They each had sacks. Denai Dennis Sutton, not purposely, but his injury was a big impact in this game because Kent State lost their starting quarterback, and we hope he's okay. He left on a stretcher. He did have movement in his arms. I haven't followed up to see how that situation went, but a little scary there. But those are tone-setting hits from Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton, and that's what you want from those guys. It's not necessarily something that we saw early on in the season in the sack department. That's something we discussed, how there was the quick pass game. There was offensive schematics trying to erase the ability for you to be a threat off the edge and sacking. But I think as we move forward here, Daniel, we're going to get a chance to really see these guys be what Tom Allen thinks they can be, where if you want to allot help to one side, then the other guy's going to make a problem for you in the passing pocket. And I think the bigger thing is that neither of them had to play much today, because they played a lot of football the first couple of weeks, and you throw Devon J. Thomas into that conversation, and Zane Durant, and guys like Tony Rojas, who we've seen carry a lot of weight for this defense. They got to watch a lot of football today.
Yeah, I think that getting some of these defenders rests and getting a look at some of this depth that you're going to need to really develop over the course of what could be 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 game season, I think is pretty important. I asked Abdul Carter after the game about finally getting that sack this year, and he said that it felt good. At the same time, he knows that what matters at the end is getting the win. He reiterated that. I asked a follow up where he's made such a big impact this year. I mean, you saw it in that West Virginia game in terms of how they were blocking him. I mean, I'm sure someone out there has counted how many holding calls there could have been on him with how he's getting off and getting through the offensive line. And so I asked him, you're making an impact, but you don't have those counting stats. How do you balance that? And he said that he has to go into every game and knowing that he needs to do his job, and he wants to come out of every game knowing that he did his job, did everything he could to help the team win and have the team win. So I think that's a little bit of a look into the mindset of Abdul Carter when he's out there. And I think that, maybe it's like a 3-point shooter. You get one, then you can really stack them from there.
Let's see him in a 3rd and 10 situation. Penn State up by a touchdown late in the game, Big Ten showdown. That's where I want to see Abdul Carter, because I think that's where he really shows up for you. And we're going to get there pretty soon. I think beyond that, we got to look at the operation without KJ Winston. He's a star player. You can make an argument he's their best defensive player. He's not available right now. So you did have Jalen Reed and Zakee Wheatley back deep starting as the safeties. You had Cam Miller starting in that Lion kind of slot role, nickel, whatever you want to call that. Everyone kind of just calls it something different, it seems. But then you've got Elliott Washington stepping up to a starting role at cornerback today, and opposite of Jalen Kimber, the transfer who's played a lot of football for them early. But as promised, Dejan Lane stepped up and got a lot of snaps. It's going to be, if you ever want to check out our snap count piece on Sunday, this is a good weekend to do it because we got a lot to work our way through. And go check that out on Sunday at lions247.com. But Lane played a ton of football, and we did still see Jalen Reed get some work at line. And James Franklin has talked about this all week, including after the game. They want to get to a point where they can pair Lane and Wheatley back deep while Winston's not available, and have Jalen Reed be a havoc wreaker at that line position.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to have James Franklin really come out and say that this is what we are trying to do, and to also see it. I know that you talk a lot about adjusting, scheme to players, adjusting players to scheme, however way you want to go about it. But I think that there's a lot of confidence in Dejan Lane. I talked to Jalen Reed and Jalen Kimber both about that post game, and they said that he's someone who's come in and handled his business. He wants to learn, which Jalen Reed said is a big thing. Jalen Reed also said that it also a big thing that Dejan Lane has going for him, just God-given ability. Like Jalen Reed called him, 6'3", 210. I think he's listed at 6'2", 211. He's got speed. So he has a lot of physical gifts back there that you can't really teach. And he's pairing that with a want to get better. And I think that's a good combination if you are Penn State. But we saw that, I think, on the second drive of the game, Lane in there deep and Reed moving up towards the line of scrimmage. And I was really interested to follow that across the course of the game. Definitely something to look for on the rewatch, but I think the early returns are really positive for Dejan Lane and what he can do. Obviously, getting to Big Ten play, it's a totally different animal. I was watching that Illinois game on Friday night, and I've seen more Illinois football over the past month than I would have normally thought I would. And it seems like every time I'm watching, Luke Altmaier is making some play downfield. So Dejan Lane and company will, they'll be in the crosshairs a little bit against the Illini. But I think that if you're Dejan Lane, you have to feel really good coming out of this. And I think if you're Penn State, you feel pretty good about what he was able to do.
And just some bullet points here from the defense as we wrap up, Daniel. And Dom DeLuca, sideline, went to the locker room, came back, didn't have his helmet on, was on the sideline. Again, part of this is you're up by a ton, so it's hard to know how much to read into it. But obviously not good when a team captain and a guy at a position that's been kind of thin is clearly not comfortable going to the locker room, injury related kind of thing, but we don't have specifics there. We'll follow up with James Franklin on Monday potentially and into next week. But also you had Tamir Robinson come back. He got a chance to really knock off that rest. He was very involved on the defense at linebacker. And Anthony Speckett, when we talk about very involved, we've been kind of calling and kind of mentioning him and saying, is it going to happen this week? It happened. He actually led the team with 5 tackles in his debut as a freshman out of Pittsburgh. He got a lot of run in that second half. And then we also did see Dakari Nelson make his defensive debut, make his linebacker debut, a former top 24/7 recruit from the 2023 class who was at safety last year, made the move in August. So those guys were all involved. And then Max Granville shows up. And James Franklin was very quick to point out in postgame that he wasn't just out there for garbage time. He was out there by design on the 3rd or the 5th series of the game here. And so they want to use Max Granville. I think it's important for them to develop at least that 5th defensive end, especially someone who can be an edge rusher, a speed rusher, who can really have that component to get after the quarterback on 3rd and passing downs. And so, Daniel, I think when we kind of combine all that, and there's a lot of other freshmen who played, we'll break that down more Monday. There were like 3 or 4 other freshmen who made their debut. But there was some really interesting things to work our way through when the curtain got peeled back toward the bottom portion of this roster in terms of the youth movement that we saw.
I think Max Granville was really I don't know if surprise is the right term for seeing him out there so early, because we've heard such good things about him since he's gotten to campus. But that's one that you put into the believe it when I see it category in terms of someone who's supposed to be in his senior year of high school right now. And we know he's 18. He's was old for his grade.
He looks like he's 25. I mean,
Yeah.
this kid is built already. He's coming along really well. But yeah, he's reclassified very late in the process.
It was late July. He shows up. Chuck Losey was even like, yeah, when he got here, I was kind of worried about what this was going to be like. But I think Max Granville has answered every single question the Penn State staff has had about him. He's risen to every challenge, it seems like, and that's gotten him to this point. I mean, he's been in his own jersey at all the practices that we've seen. Like he's been firmly in the varsity mix. So to see him out there early, I thought was really interesting. As things go forward and you talk about developing that depth at defensive end, it's an interesting one for the green light, yellow light category with Max Granville. But to see him out there, he didn't get a forced fumble that it looked like he could have combined with Antoine Belgrave Shorter for a scoop and score, but he gets the quarterback hurry and showed some things, showed he could lay a hit. And I'm really curious to see what a role for him could look like moving forward.
Let's finish with, I guess, the biggest kind of issue that James Franklin saw with this performance today, and it was the final question posed to the press conference afterwards, and he took it and ran with it. It was about the penalties. We mentioned this before last week. It was one of those bye-week priorities. They wanted to clean that up. It didn't look that way today. 7 penalties for 65 yards. Kent State had 2 penalties for 20 yards. It was also those pre-snap penalties, getting them again. So James Franklin said he was angered by it. He said he's going to hold his staff to account for it, and I think working its way down the players to account. And I don't know if he was just really trying to make sure he was as emphatic as possible to kind of maybe scare his staff or his players out there who are going to catch wind of this press conference, or if he was genuinely that kind of peeved about it. But I think bottom line is he knows that kind of stuff can cost you in a huge way against the most important opponents on their schedule. And the one next Saturday is looking pretty important. And so if you're going to spend the entire season where they are right now toward the bottom of the barrel in the Big Ten in terms of penalties per game, that is something that you're going to be rolling the dice with.
Yeah, Frank. It was the last question, and Franklin said that it was it was ending it on putting him in a bad mood to end it.
He said you pissed me off. Yeah. And he said this was going to make his wife angry because now he was going to come home angry, and she's going to be like, you won 56-0. So, but you know what? This is what coaches do. They focus on what needs to be fixed, and whether it's 56-0 or 34-27, this is how Franklin is wired.
Yeah, I don't think us leaving this till the end will end it in a bad mood for us as we go on with our nights. But yeah, I mean, you talk about it. Like, if you want to win at the level that Penn State wants to win at this year, you can't lose games on the margins. And I think that you think about that more in terms of on-field stuff like turnovers, missed field goals, other special teams gaffes, that sort of margin. But penalties count too. I mean, I think we talked about that Washington State game where Washington had like 130 yards in penalties and loses by 5 points. I mean, there's probably some number of points that's in Penn State's 7 penalties if they're playing a Big Ten opponent. And I think that a lot of this does need to get cleaned up. I mean, there's another offsides penalty on the defensive line. Just these little things that
Gavin Williams had kind of a rough day in the penalty department, right?
Yeah,
I think it was a hold, and then was there a post play penalty?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yeah.
so I mean that's obviously
guy.
He's getting some extra run there. Not something that he wants as part of his resume from getting that kind of body of work out there at the left tackle position.
Exactly, but it'll be interesting to see how you approach that, what you do to fix that, because it's not something you can make like a scheme tweak for or something along those lines. It's like discipline is one of those things that can be really, really hard to do, and it's something that you really want to instill in the off season. That's where you really build that up. So I'm curious to see how Penn State addresses this moving forward. What they can do to fix it, because it's not something that on its face has an easy fix in terms of scheme or personnel or something along those lines. But knowing James Franklin and knowing how he ended that presser today and what's ahead of Penn State when they come back into the facility to watch film and get ready for practice and get ready for Illinois, I think they'll be hearing about it.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Well, we will get back with you all on Monday. Our next podcast, and another week of podcasts will begin coming out of James Franklin's next press conference. That'll be in Beaver Stadium Monday afternoon. Between now and then, I encourage you to go to lions247.com. Not only will we have a ton coming out of this game, including snap counts and top takeaways and our photo gallery and a lot more from the matchup, but we're going to have Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan, breaking down the latest from recruiting, because there were a lot of top prospects on campus today, and they'll be talking about their experience and who knows what could happen coming off of a visit weekend in terms of classes getting bigger. So stay with us at lions247.com. We'll be with you soon. On behalf of Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan, and Grace Brennan, and Tyler Calvaruso, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.